Our next session is about cyber security threats that are happening in today's world. There will be many topics that we will tackle here. How do we really cope with it? How do traditional companies can actually deal with these threats today in today's world? Can we apply Internet of Things? Could artificial intelligence make us proactive against these cyber threats? So our session will be about dissecting the cyber threats of emerging technologies. Our moderator for the session will be Salam Yamout. Please join us on the stage. She's the Regional Director, Middle East of Internet Society. Welcome, Salam. Our dear guests and speakers for this session will be Aftab Siddiqui, the Technical Engagement Manager for Asia Pacific Internet Society. Please join us on the stage. And we're lucky to have Dr. Michael Nelson again, Tech Strategy at Cloudflare. Please join us. And Mr. Amin Hasbini, Senior Security Researcher, Global Research and Analysis Team. Welcome. Thank you so much. Please enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you, Amal, and good morning, everybody, and thank you for the EDB for making this event possible. So my question to you is, what is Internet Society? But after we finish the panel, the one that knows will get a gift from me, okay? So again, thank you for my panelists, and I thought we start with a 1 or 2 sentences tweet, 160 characters. Who are you, and why are you on this panel? Let's start with you, Amin.
Okay. Hello, everyone. So I'm a security researcher and a threat hunter and board member at securingsmartcities.org.
And I'm Mike Nelson. I'm helping invent the future for 30 years. And way back when, I almost became the first person fired for using the internet.
All right, I'm Aftab Siddiqui. I work for the Internet Society as well, but I live, breathe, eat routing security and the IoT security, and I think I'm at the right place right now.
Well, that's good to have the right people at the right places. So first, let me ask you, why is IoT security such a different kind from cybersecurity? What is different in this time that we live in what concern with cybersecurity and IoT security? You want to start, Michael?
Yeah. The big difference is that with the Internet of Things, the devices are often so much less complicated. They don't have a lot of computing power. In some cases, they don't have a lot of bandwidth either. So it's not like securing a large server or even a cell phone where you can put a lot of software and you can do a lot of monitoring. Imagine a lawn with sprinklers. You might have networked sprinklers in the future. They don't have to collect a lot of data. They just have to report whether they're on or off and maybe how moist the soil is. So the idea that each device is going to be super secure with 3 layers of protection doesn't make sense. You need a different approach for that reason.
Okay, Aftab?
Yeah, exactly as Mike said. One thing we need to understand when we talk about IoT, it's Internet of Connected Devices. These devices are not in isolation. Everything is connected to Internet, and we learned our lessons in last couple of decades that if it is going to the Internet, well, it's a good idea. It should be secured. But there are just too many of them. People were just so Mike asked this question: how many people have more than 10 devices? And we have few of them right now. But it's just a matter of time, they will be all of us. So if we have that many devices in our house connected to the Internet, you cannot just have a blanket security policy and say, okay, fine, I've secured everything. That's why we have to look into with a different perspective that these devices are, as Mike said, very small, doesn't have a lot of computing power, and normal security policy doesn't apply to them the way we have been applying to the other devices like our cell phone or our TV or something else.
Can you give me an example of IoT devices being used in a cyber attack?
Oh, yeah, plenty of them. The biggest one was the Mirai botnet, which happened almost 2 years ago. And it started from as simple device as a webcam or the surveillance cameras, which tried to take down the whole internet, which Cloudflare tried to avoid to some extent, but it was as huge. I mean, it was the biggest incident of that year, and still today. And it's still there. It
So they used cameras as bots.
Yes, it's
and how did they enter inside the cameras? I mean, how would they were able to use the cameras as bots?
So that's because of the missing of the framework. So what there were few vendors which just rolled out the equipment without any plan to update them later on. Some vulnerabilities came out. They had no intentions or no plans to fix them or patch them. And this is what's happening with all the IoT devices today. Things are there in the market you can buy, but eventually within few months or probably in a year, they'll just be exposed to the internet with so many vulnerabilities on it.
Yes, so basically IoT devices are consumer electronics, they're not computers. So they're thrown into the market with very little, basically built-in security. A lot of them have admin as username and password. And the other thing is we're used to buy computers with bugs, and then later on the manufacturers send us a patch. So imagine your car wants to do an update patch when at 2 o'clock in the morning when your wife is having a baby or wants to go to the hospital. So it's not the same kind of framework of thinking that we use on regular security. From your perspective, I mean, again, why is IoT security so different from the other cybersecurity? And if you can also give us an example.
Sure, sure. Well, the situation is really challenging. Like we mentioned, the problems with lower resources. We mentioned the problems with weaknesses and vulnerabilities. And then we have all of these devices connected online, but they are remotely controllable.
Yes, true.
So this is number one. We can remotely control them. We cannot, in most cases, remotely secure them. Therefore, someone or anyone on the internet can just develop a tool which scans for these devices and controls them to do attacks on banks, governments, ISPs, etc. So that's a big challenge, and regulators are not able to control the situation, mainly because these devices are everywhere. So these devices could be actually in hundreds of, many countries or many cities, and then no one is actually able to control them, and the user is not liable. So that is the other problem that we have, is that my fridge is doing an attack. How can I be responsible? Is the vendor responsible? Is my local seller responsible? Is the government responsible?
Yeah, we're going to come to this responsibility question later.
Just to pick up on something that both of them emphasized, the other big difference here is that now, because so many systems are interdependent, attacks on the Internet of Things can have these cascade effects. You mentioned the Dyn attack. 160,000 video cameras attacked the service that hundreds of millions of people use to navigate the internet. When you type in a URL, you have to get to an internet protocol address, and the service that was doing that was attacked and was crippled. So that's one example of this interdependence. But the other thing to think about is that with the Internet of Things, we're interdependent on physical systems. In the US, we often talk about cyber physical systems. So imagine someone attacks the traffic light system here in Bahrain. Well, now you're actually causing accidents with vehicles that are moving at 50 kilometers an hour and weigh 1,000 kilograms. I mean, that's a much more deadly thing. And I mentioned the book click here to kill everybody. That's why I think we have to pay so much more attention to how we design these systems, because of the possibility of cascades. Someone attacks a gas pipeline that knocks out the heating for an entire town.
Yes, but you all emphasized on the bot aspects of the IoT. So these are devices that are everywhere that people will be using to do attacks. But there's another point to the IoT devices as well, which is if I have a pacemaker, that's going to be an IoT device. But I mean, if somebody changes the pacemaker, I might go into cardiac arrest and die. If somebody hooks my car, that's $125,000 worth of investment gone. If somebody hacks my refrigerator, I might die from not eating, right? So we're thinking here that these things are inside our lives. It's about personal property and personal loss, personal life, as opposed to the traditional, I guess, software system. Yeah?
Or having a video game that doesn't work.
Or having a video game. So I go back to Amin, because Amin told you he's a researcher as Kaspersky, and I wanted to first ask him, what do you see are the major threats, the cybersecurity threats for the regions?
Okay. Well, one very important and recent emerging type of threat that we are seeing increasingly, like we investigated multiple incidents where supply chains were attacked. And we all rely on supply chain in everything that we do, whether software or hardware. And all of our devices are connected online. We have, like on our computers, sometimes dozens or hundreds of software applications running. And these, in many cases, get updates automatically from their servers, from the provider, from the vendor or the solution provider. And in supply chain, here's an example. Who uses CC Cleaner? Have you heard about CC Cleaner? Can I see hands? CC Cleaner is a very nice software which helps in doing what? Enhancing performance and deleting jargon files and unused data on our devices. And it's very interesting, it's very important, everyone uses it, even in enterprise organizations. Now what happened is CC Cleaner, the main vendor or the main developer of the solution, they got hacked. And someone implanted malicious software inside their updates. So from the single source, which is the software provider, they pushed a malicious update to hundreds of millions of users worldwide. And imagine that as a supply chain attack. They're only attacking one single organization, but infecting hundreds of millions or at least millions of users and organizations at the same time. That's, I think, is becoming a very trendy situation for attackers because, again, it's a single organization and too many victims.
Aftab.
I mean, right, he said there are few new things coming up every passing day. But just remember, we see the same things happening again and again and again. Old vulnerabilities coming back again. Oh, it happened 2 years ago, why I'm seeing this again? Well, people didn't patch. People didn't fix their issue. There's a website called Shodan. It scans for the known vulnerabilities. You go there, last night I checked. If you just select Bahrain, BH, you will find thousands of vulnerable devices from Bahrain. It's a small country with a small population. So it means people are not patching or not making sure that they are following the suggestions their vendors are giving to them, or they are using the devices which are obsolete. So it's just like new things are coming up, old are not dying. So it's just adding up. So we have to be, so it's consumer devices, yes. What I'm always interested in that what is the color of my bulb, right? So if it's a flip hue bulb, I don't care if it is patched or not from a consumer perspective. And this is where we have to make a difference. We have to change the way people use devices. It's not like, okay, fine, you bought a consumer good which is connected to the internet, but there are consequences attached to that. So you have to follow that. New are coming up, but we have to take care of the old one. What happens to the old one? So that's the biggest issue nobody is talking about.
Yeah, so are you saying it's the user's fault? The user has to protect himself or herself?
Well,
who is responsible?
you have to wear the seatbelt, right?
Yes.
So it is the user's responsibility, but there is a regulation by all the governments, I believe, all across the world, which says you have to wear the seatbelt. So it's a two-way road.
So Aftab, are you saying that the IoT security problem and security problem can be resolved by government resolution and regulation?
No, not just by government regulation, or it's quite easy to just regulate things. But the thing is, it's, as I said, it's a two-way road. You have to bring all the stakeholders on board. I'm part of the Internet IoT Association, IoT Alliance Australia, where we have formulated the IoT Security Framework. It's a very well-written document talking about the policy, the regulation, of course, and the consumer rights and their responsibilities. So it's a very lengthy document. We worked on it for a whole year, and it came out as one of the best practices. It is not a very regulated document, but a very best practice, for the best practice. So there are some activities happening all across the world, Singapore, Hong Kong, and in many European countries, and of course in US as well. But I see there's a missing part in Middle East and South Asia as well. So responsibility is with everyone.
Okay. How about you, Michael?
I think there's about 3 different answers I'll give very briefly. First off, to build on your point about tools that people can use to find out if they're vulnerable, there's a wonderful website run by Troy Hunt.
Oh, yes.
It's called Have I Been Pwned? P-W-N-E-D. And what this allows you to do is to type in your email address and find out how many times your passwords have been breached and disclosed. He's collected all the lists of all the passwords that were revealed by hacker attacks and disclosed by different companies. And so you can go on and you can find out that 4 years ago, some password you didn't even know you had created was revealed. What is very important is that you go on this website right now and make sure that if you're using a password in more than one place, that password hasn't been divulged. Because the first thing a hacker does when they get a password is try it in several other places, particularly banks and financial institutions. Cloudflare is a big supporter of this site, and we actually provide service to it to make it faster. The second point is one that both of you talked about a little bit, and that is we have to worry about the insider threat. And that's something that hasn't been mentioned much, but in most cases, probably 2/3, maybe even 80% of the serious breaches that occur and the serious cybersecurity incidents somehow involve somebody inside the company. It's often an employee who's not happy, maybe somebody who's bribed or even threatened. And addressing that problem is going to require better monitoring of systems. One reason we're so excited about the cloud and why we're convinced that the cloud can be more secure is that we have the ability to monitor each machine, detect if there's some strange behavior going on, if somebody's downloading a bunch of files that aren't supposed to be downloaded. That's much easier if you have a large cloud-based system run by the world's best engineers and designed to have monitoring and automation as part of the system. If you're a dentist or a psychiatrist and you're just keeping files on your PC, there probably aren't many layers of monitoring, and there certainly isn't 24-hour security to make sure that somebody isn't going in there and downloading sensitive medical files. And then the last thing I would say is a huge threat, not just in this region, but around the world, is the stupid stuff I talked about earlier. Those of you who are observant will probably notice I have changed out of my Washington, D.C. uniform of suit and tie I'm now wearing my West Coast uniform of a t-shirt, and this is a very famous Internet Society t-shirt. How many people are network engineers familiar with the IETF? Well, this is the seven layer stack of the internet plus two more layers, financial and political. And here it says, you are here, pointing political. If we don't do the policy right, we're going to hold back innovative solutions for cybersecurity. We're actually going to make the problem worse. In some cases, we have countries proposing that everybody install 5 or 10-year-old technology when there's a modern solution that's 10 or 20 times cheaper and more efficient. The only thing worse than doing nothing is telling people to spend a bunch of money that accomplishes nothing. A good example is the sprinkler system I talked about earlier. There are proposals that would make everybody take each 50-cent device for monitoring your lawn and add $5 or $10 of security. The logical thing to do is to take the 50 or 100 sensors in your lawn and connect them to the internet through a secure gateway that might cost $10 and provide security for all those devices. But the political answer is, let's make everything secure, even if it increases the cost of each device or makes it totally impractical to even use those devices. So that's my serious concern about what could stand in the way of better cybersecurity.
Amin.
One small comment. I don't really agree with our push towards blaming the users. Mainly because the users are generic types of people which do not have sufficient knowledge in most cases to operate devices which are changing rapidly. So if I have a smart home, I live in a smart city, I have probably dozens or hundreds of devices connected online. They all run different systems or different micro firmwares. And there is a responsibility on the vendors that if you want to sell this software, once it connects online, then it needs to be updated automatically. If that does not happen, then maybe the device should not be configured or allowed to connect online, which is, for example, the case of the sprinklers. Maybe the sprinklers don't need to go online for someone to just poke at them, because if they are online, someone will poke at them and then figure out how to get in eventually.
Not if they're behind a secure gateway. That's the key.
Yes,
I mean, that's the architecture, not some blanket solution for every device. But I fully agree with you. It's not the user's fault, it's the vendor's fault for not making it easy.
Yeah, I don't think anybody said it's the users only. But then who is responsible?
Even there was a case where gateways were used in order to scan and hack internal devices inside the home, like in the case of VPN filter. But then who's to blame? We need a global agreement on how these devices should be connected or not connected, and then we need them to be developed enough and mature enough in order to self-update, because no user, not even me as a security professional, is willing to connect to each device and update it manually, and each device will be running different sets of commands and different sets of software.
Yeah.
So this has to be done remotely, though it is still a requirement to maintain a safe supply chain. That's, again, the second...
That's the hardest problem.
Yeah. So, but that's interesting then answer, because I have 3 speakers, and first one really advocates for regulatory solutions, global regulatory solution. The middle panelist advocates for free market, and my colleague here advocates for a collaborative approach, including all multi-stakeholders. Can you agree with each other?
Well, I think they can all agree with me that government has an important role to play in creating the free market and the competition. When somebody asks me about policy, my first answer is always competition, innovation, and transparency. We have to know when something fails so people can buy something else. But they can only buy something else if there's competition, and there's only competition if there's innovation. So those three things are what governments really need to focus on, and that will meet the needs of citizens.
That would be a sensible recommendation for me, Michael, because from my government days, I also know that regulation is very slow, and the pace at which technology is moving is going to make it almost impossible to regulate correctly before all the technology is evolving. We don't even know the beginning of the implications, like you said in your first.
But it's even worse than that, because in some cases, the government intervenes in a way that actually freezes technology or favors one answer and eliminates the competition that would come if we allowed several answers to develop. That's why I think the framework you mentioned is a great example. The United States has the Nist Framework. It's not a list of standards that everybody has to abide by. It's a list of questions that everybody has to answer with a number of recommended answers, and that list of answers improves and expands with time. But that's the right way to do it. A framework, not a list of a checklist.
And government has a role to play, absolutely. I can give you the same example of Australia, where they provided the support. They said, we will help you and bring all the stakeholders on the same table. What to do after that, it's your responsibility. But they provided a platform. And because it was supported by the government, we worked very fast, right? And we end up developing the first draft. It went through a public consultation process. It was because it was supported by the government. They said it has to be publicly advertised. That many days, we got so many comments, and we said, okay, fine, we'll update thing. It's just a framework.
Yes.
It's not a regulation.
Yes. Well, that's why it's so effective.
Yes, there are some pieces out of it that you can say, okay, I can pick 5 of things and come up with a regulatory policy, but it's still a framework. It is applicable to everyone. It is supporting everyone. It's not saying that I'm going to kill the competition because it is just going in one direction. No, it puts responsibility on everyone, and it gives ideas for innovation as well. I mean, it is very easy to paint a very horrible picture of Internet of Connected Devices. But it gives us an opportunity, and it gives an option to innovate, which we haven't done in the past. Just imagine, like, you have like 100 devices in your house. You have to manage it in your house. Whether you are tech savvy or not, you have to somehow manage it in your house. You have to have good internet connectivity. You have to have proper Wi-Fi connectivity. So you will learn eventually. User will be more informed moving forward. Yeah. So there is some responsibility. We cannot just say, well, they are just using it for a sprinkler. Of course, they have to know the consequences of using an internet-connected sprinkler.
Yeah. I think the other thing we can all agree on is the government has a role to play by being a leading-edge adopter, by being the model. Yeah. One of the best things we did when I was in the White House was spend $300,000 on the whitehouse.gov website. Yes. Nobody had a website at that point. Bill Clinton having a website made sure that every governor, every CEO, every cabinet minister wanted their website. And the Bahraini government, by going forward with its cloud first philosophy and showing how the cloud can be more secure, is going to convince a lot of people in the private sector, in academia, and elsewhere to embrace that kind of approach. Show how it works, show you can succeed.
And every time I look at this picture, this famous building,
yes,
that was the most innovative thing happened here. I've seen it in National Geographic so many times, saying, well, nothing of this like happened before.
Yeah.
So that was the most innovative thing. Then why they can't do it?
Lead by example.
Exactly.
Lead by example.
Exactly.
So guys, Amin has been very patient waiting because he wanted to say something.
No, I'm fine.
That's because he agrees with us.
Maybe one comment. Like these discussions around government agreeing on how to operate or allow the operations of technologies are somehow shaping up. We've been hearing about the Microsoft Geneva Convention more now, and it actually allows us to think more about innovation than actually sitting and trying to figure out how to secure these devices. Once top governments, as in the picture, once you solve the political, then everything follows afterwards until you have a certain level of safety that allows us to use technology. Because at the current level of safety, which requires like people to do more effort themselves for technologies that are changing daily, it's becoming harder and harder to actually own a mobile phone. I'm afraid of the camera, I'm afraid of the microphone, I'm afraid of the GPS tracking on my devices. So once we resolve these issues, then we'll have more time and effort to spend on creativity and innovation in order to move technology forward.
So Mr. Khalid, in the opening session, talked about NEOM, about all the smart cities in Dubai coming in. He talked about catching up. Are we in a position that now we can play catch up, maybe with the emerging technologies? He feels that we are more to par, you know, because the whole rest of the world is all starting, and if we start with them, maybe we won't be that not advanced as we are like today in some other technologies. Do you think it's possible? Do you think are we ready for the smart cities?
Not really, sadly. So the situation is the following. If we connect everything now, then everything is possible to hack or to attack. And we talk about the industrial revolution and the industrial Internet of Things, then we'll have everything connected, including elevators, including electricity devices, generators, and transformers. And if these could be remotely controlled, like what happened in Ukraine, then we'll have to deal with some unfortunate situations where cities could be turned off. And that is not something that we can handle or afford, especially here in the region. It's just a matter of human life.
Why? Because we don't have the know-how, or because we...
Technologies currently do not allow full, like technologies are maturing, they're not super mature or mature enough, and we need, like, why do we build smart cities? We build them for the people, for the citizens. So in parallel of smart cities, we also need smart citizens. And that is like, when you go into the literature of smart cities, you'll figure out that the human capital is the most important thing in a smart city, and future cities will actually be competing to attract skilled experts and employees for their cities in order to benefit of them and in order for them to have happy living. So human capital is again a very important aspect that is not given enough attention.
So more aware citizen, more engineers, more technical know-how. Anything else you want to add?
So I'm not very much worried about the smart city because usually the governments are involved, and or most of the vendors involved in manufacturing those devices have very well. Of course, they cannot build a very secure device from day one, but they do have life cycle. What is the most worrisome for me is the consumer devices. I can just buy 200 Raspberry Pis, put it in a box, 3D printed, and come up with some cool idea of a device which you can use in your house and start selling at eBay or souq.com, right? I'm worried about that device, because if it doesn't work, I'm going to shut down my shop and leave. And there will be 200 devices in 200 houses, vulnerable forever until they throw them away. So, but smart cities, of course, if something goes wrong, well, there were some incidents, I know that, but it was easier for the governments or whoever was monitoring it to figure it out. Well, there is a problem, either fix it or we have to remove or replace those devices. But By the time people found out that there are 200 problematic devices in 200 households, it will be too late.
I was going to say that I think Bahrain is well situated to take advantage of the smart cities movement because you are building so much new infrastructure. You walk down the street here and just places that had nothing when I was here 10 years ago now have 15 high-rise buildings, each one of which will have modern technology. And the other thing is we don't have to put wires everywhere like we would have 10 years ago. Yeah. We have so many wireless solutions that will make it a lot easier. But the most important advantage that this country has is that you have a lot of very well-trained people. People trained in region or elsewhere, and they come back here, they have the financing to do experimental things that they couldn't do anywhere else, they couldn't do elsewhere. So I'm very optimistic, and what I see combined with the political leadership that I see, I think has all the right pieces.
It's a panel of optimistic, I think, people. I think we can open the questions to the audience. Oh, we have a lot of hands. We're going to start from the back because I see a very energetic and hand in the back.
Hello. My question is for Mr. Amin. You spoke about smart city, smart citizen, and you did not feel that, you said specifically in the Middle East, you don't think we're ready. So my question is, which city would you call smart, and what are the attributes that qualify those citizens as smart citizens that we do not have here? Thank you.
Okay, let me clarify. The human capital issue is a global issue. It's not only a Middle Eastern issue. So that's definitely worth clarification. But again, from a smart citizens perspective, we still miss cyber education in schools and universities for like domains that are not relevant to technology. And that is something that could be enhanced. Even living in a smart city, I can see that as a driving license. We do have driving license, which allows us to drive in the roads, right? We probably need some type of certification which allows us to use all of these technologies safely. That is what is important, safely for our safety, our kids' safety.
Do these certifications that we require exist anywhere in the world?
At the moment, there are some efforts happening globally in order to train users, but they are not large-scale types of institutions which do have like obligations on citizens.
I have one more question regarding keeping everything online or offline. So isn't it wise to just keep anything that has to do with the critical infrastructure offline and not connect, because I saw some of you were arguing what to keep connected and what not, but isn't there like a move worldwide, if there's anything to do with the critical infrastructure, just do not connect it to the internet?
Okay, can we take 3 or 4?
I would say that that's not the right solution in many cases, because some of the systems that are being used today for critical infrastructure, whether it's electricity or gas pipelines, are 20 or 25 years old. They're full of vulnerabilities. And because they're only used in a few specific places, there's very little pressure to improve the security, and they're more vulnerable than they would be if they were actually connecting to the internet and using the best security that we have. So a blanket prohibition on connecting critical infrastructure and devices for the critical infrastructure to the internet would be a bad idea. The other thing is sometimes we're using plain old ordinary applications, even Twitter, to help manage our critical infrastructure. People are using that kind of technology, the consumer technology, so we have to make everything better rather than somehow pretending that we can decide that's critical infrastructure and we'll do something different there. The other question is whether Facebook and Twitter are becoming critical infrastructure, but I'm not going to answer that question.
Ooh, okay. In the back?
Hi. We are talking of cyber threats to technology. I've always wondered, with all these wireless devices that we are using, the threat to one's health, because this is all radiation. And the more and more devices we are using, especially kids. When I fly, I see a 3-year-old being given an, tablet to keep him amused, to play, or etc. So can we talk about that? Because I think at the end of the day, all this is being done for human beings. And if they're going to get sick using these, what is being done to take care of that?
Well, I'm trained as a physicist, and the physicists have been very outspoken, saying people are confused. Radiation is not radiation. When we talk about radio waves and radiation in that, it's not the same as radioactive decay and what causes cancer. So there's some confusion right there. But the other thing is we have done this massive uncontrolled experiment where billions of people are putting a radio emitter next to their head for sometimes hours each day, and we haven't seen a dramatic increase in cancer. I mean, it would be if there was a cause, if it was causing cancer, it would be very obvious, because there'd be a lot more cancer on right-handed people on the right side. I mean, there's a lot of reasons that we can go and say, no, that's not a problem. The more important question is, I think, the last P on my list of cyber policy concerns, which was psychology. And I do think that immersing kids in a digital world and not giving them enough time to interact in the real world or to go for a walk in the park is a concern. I also think that we're seeing cases now where eyesight, people are having problems with their eyes because they're staring so close for so long, and particularly for young kids, that could be a problem and lead to more vision problems down the road. But I think the issue about cancer caused by radiation or by radio waves is something where we've done study after study and not seen a lot of evidence.
I have 2 questions in the front. Can we have the microphone? One here and one here.
Thank you. The question is about, you spoke about the security and threats, and I would like to add the privacy. So I would say, do you still think we have privacy in this well over-connected digital world or no? Thank you.
Well, we do indeed still have a bit of privacy, though it's disappearing fast. And the main cause is that we want to use technology, right? This technology wants to enhance our living and our life, our homes. It needs access to these properties, to these like screens, to these pictures, to these censored data. And this needs to be analyzed. Maybe we can do it inside our home, but the most probable situation and the most popular situation will always be, for example, the cloud. Processing is easier there, it's cheaper there. And things are moving towards the anonymization of data, but then it's a global discussion right now. We're definitely losing privacy. We developed a document in Securing Smart Cities. It's about the Internet of Access Control. And imagine that once you're moving inside a country, an actual government has the ability, if they want to see you going into the supermarket, then to the cinema, then to the grocery store, getting some goods, you paid with your credit card, everything is being stored in a single place. There is a need that could be justified in collecting and using such data for enhancing efficiency and performance, but then such needs to be very, very well protected.
Can I add a real quick 20 seconds to that? I mentioned earlier that competition is a key part of answering these problems. There is a competition to provide better privacy. Cloudflare is benefiting from that competition. We're providing all sorts of services to provide better privacy and better security. Apple is benefiting. They have a reputation for protecting your data better because they're selling you hardware, they're not collecting your data and using it in ways that aren't understood. The other reason I'm optimistic is
that's more than 20
if
seconds.
people have seen The Economist magazine from 2 weeks ago, there's a manifesto in here on what we need to do to create more competition and more innovation. If you haven't read this, read this. This is probably the most important political document of the year, and it could lead to a world where we have competition to do better for people, including addressing privacy. It could also lead to a world where employees have more power. We're seeing employees speaking out when they see companies that aren't doing the right thing for their customers. Cambridge Analytica was a great example of where one employee exposed really bad behavior that violated the privacy of tens of millions of people.
Good, good. Last question.
Thank you very much. I believe we've heard so many areas that is talking about security and cyber environment and how we can secure it. But the name of the game in every industry and every market is trust. How can we build trust within the users of the cyber environment? Thank you.
So just quickly onto this one before somebody else share. As part of the Internet Society's effort, we extensively work on trust and privacy. We have our own framework on both, and it talks about trust and privacy and how you cannot enforce it to anyone. Of course, commercial interest comes second after political. So, but at least you can, you have to have something to follow that, well, you have a framework, there are certain things you should have it in your public offering, whether it is a application, whether it's the hardware, whether it's any service. And same goes with the trust. I mean, trust comes with something, you have to provide something.
Trust comes from transparency and understanding. So we as vendors have to make people secure in understanding what we are doing, and that will create a lot more trust. If we make it easy for them to use, easy to understand, that will ratchet up the trust.
With this, any urging 2 seconds? No. With this, we end this panel. Thank you very much.